Fire salamanders are a fascinating group of amphibians with many unique adaptations. They are particularly known for the bright colorations and toxins used by most of the species. These intriguing animals have even had many interesting myths, legends, and beliefs about them throughout history. As usual, a document with the sources for the images used, along with research papers I found useful, will be included in the description of this video. Amphibians are mostly semi-aquatic vertebrates, although some have reverted back to a fully aquatic form and others have adapted for a fully terrestrial lifestyle. In general, amphibians need to lay their eggs in water to reproduce. This makes them different from reptiles or birds, as their eggs are not protected by a shell. Their young then emerge as fully aquatic. When they are ready to become adults, they will undergo metamorphosis, allowing them to leave the water and become semi-aquatic. In amphibians, their skin is a very important organ. In most species, this needs to be kept moist, and if it dries out, they will die. Their skin is a semi-permeable membrane, meaning that it allows certain elements and compounds to pass through it. They use this to help them breathe oxygen, although most of them do also have lungs. It does also mean that harmful chemicals can enter their bodies through their skin, so water pollution can be a large issue for them. People who handle amphibians are advised to wear gloves and limit the amount of time they are handled as well. This is because even holding one can dry it out, and chemical residue left on hands can be harmful because it can be absorbed into the amphibians through their skin. Modern amphibians are divided into 3 orders. The first is the Caecilians in Gymnophiona. This is the group of amphibians you are likely the least familiar with, and to be honest, many scientists don't know much about them either. They are hard to find, often burrowing into moist soil or stream beds, meaning that they are rarely seen. The next order is the frogs and toads in Anura. They are probably the most well-known amphibians. The young in many species are known as tadpoles and are fully aquatic. The adults have bodies low to the ground, and most species are good at jumping. Many species have toxins, and these can range from just making them taste bad to being deadly. Finally, we come to the salamanders in Urodela. The adults have a lizard-like appearance with a body low to the ground and a long tail. The young are called larvae, and like tadpoles, many of these are fully aquatic. There is a lot of diversity in the life cycle of salamanders, however, with some species remaining fully aquatic their entire life, while others emerge from the water to live mostly on land, although, as amphibians, most species need to return to the water to reproduce. There are 10 families of living salamanders. The fire salamanders are in the family Salamandridae, containing the true salamanders and the newts. These are distinguished from other salamanders as they have no ribs and also have relatively rough skin. This skin texture is caused by their poison glands, as most species are toxic. Salamandridae is most closely related to the families Ambystomatidae and Decamptodontidae. The Ambystomatidae are most famous for the axolotl, a common sight in the pet trade, although they are critically endangered in the wild. The Decamptodontidae are the giant salamanders, which, as the name suggests, include the largest salamanders alive today. The other 7 families are also diverse, and many of them are included in the same superfamily as the 3 I have mentioned. There are 2 other superfamilies, although these only contain 1 or 2 families each. The fire salamanders are all in the genus Salamandra. As we will see when we go through the species, a lot of work has been done to try and separate out the different species, as many of the species listed used to be considered subspecies of the fire salamander. This still requires more work, as some of the subspecies currently considered as part of the fire salamander might still need to be moved to their own species. Fire salamanders have an interesting place in folklore and legends, and this is also reflected in the name. Fire salamanders were considered to have a connection to fire and are able to live in it or extinguish it as they please. These beliefs date all the way back to ancient Greece, as Aristotle wrote that different creatures belong to each of the 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire. And he assigned the salamander as the creature of fire. Variations of this belief continued right through antiquity and into the medieval period. Despite being called salamanders, the depictions of them would make them look a lot more like reptiles than amphibians. Leonardo da Vinci, for example, wrote that the salamandra have no digestive organs, and gets no food but from the fire, in which it constantly renews its scaly skin. Salamanders, like all amphibians, don't have scales. This is just an example of how the depiction of fire salamanders has become more lizard-like over time. Salamanders were commonly used as a symbol in alchemy as well. It should be unsurprising at this point, but they are typically used as a symbol of fire, and they were also sometimes used to symbolize the soul, or sulfur, or salt. Perhaps because of these associations, salamanders were often considered devils in the 14 and 1500s. Paracelsus, an alchemist and philosopher from this time, disagreed with this common view, but what was interesting about his interpretation is that he considered them of similar intelligence to humans, but lacking a soul. He put them into the same category as giants, dwarves, and undines, among other similar sentient beings. Various cultures and people believed that fire salamander blood or body parts could protect from fire. Prester John, a mythical figure in Christianity, was believed to have a coat made from salamander hair. The Jewish Hagiga believed that anyone smeared in salamander blood would be immune to fire. There are many other examples of these kinds of beliefs, and while they are fascinating, and far more involved than I have time to get into here, it is time to move on. It is thought that their association with fire originated as they inhabit rotting logs. When logs were placed on the fire, the salamanders would crawl out to escape from the heat. This gave people the impression that they were born from fire, or otherwise immune to its effects. Note that some of these superstitions are still used today in fiction. For example, the Disney movie Frozen 2 includes a fire spirit that takes the form of a salamander, obviously inspired by many of these myths. Alright, the myths are interesting, but let's start looking at the actual species. The Alpine Salamander, Salamandra atra, is completely black, lacking the orange and red coloration that gives the fire salamanders their name. As their name suggests, Alpine salamanders live at high altitudes, from 700 to 2,000 meters, or 2,300 to 6,600 feet above sea level. They are found throughout many of the Alps in Europe, in France, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Austria. While often found under rocks or in rock crevices, alpine salamanders do well in alpine forests. They are found in forests of a variety of different types of tree, from fir to beech to spruce. Females are larger than males and can grow up to 15 centimeters or 5.6 inches long. There are several subspecies of alpine salamander. The most widespread one has the characteristic solid black coloration that the species is known for. However, the golden alpine salamander has yellow spots on its back, similar to the bright coloration seen in other species of this genus. This golden variant is only found in a small area of the Venetian Prealps and the Italian Alps. A different subspecies, Salamandra atra pasubiensis, has no common name, but is very similar to the golden alpine salamander, although it has fewer spots. It is also found in a small area of the Venetian Prealps, although in a different area. The last subspecies is debated, with some claiming it should be a separate species, with the Prien alpine salamander. This is only found on the Prien mountain range in Bosnia and Herzegovina. While they live on land like many salamanders, they are unusual in that the young do not live in the water and do not undergo metamorphosis. They are viviparous, and so do not even lay eggs at all, instead giving birth to live young. While pregnancy is typically around 2 years long, this actually seems to depend on the altitude, as those at high altitudes will be pregnant for longer, up to around 4 years. It only gives birth to 1 or 2 young at a time. This is an extremely slow rate of reproduction for any animal, but especially for such a short-lived species, as alpine salamanders have a life expectancy ranging from 10 years old to their mid-20s. Alpine salamanders have resting sites that they reuse, often for their entire life. It is presumed that they control a small territory around their resting site, as they do not tend to move far from it. Bonato and Fracasso in 2003 found that the maximum distance any of the adult salamanders they were studying moved during the year was 12 meters or 39 feet from their resting site. The exception to this was juveniles in their first year. These would show no such loyalty to a resting site or territory, often dispersing quite far from their parent. Alpine salamanders are promiscuous, with males and females both mating with multiple partners. Males will sometimes engage in combat, where they chase or fight other males, but it is unknown whether this is defending their territory, or their access to a female, or for another reason. Alpine salamanders are rated as least concerned by the IUCN. They have a wide distribution and are common throughout much of it. In 2003, they were found to have a population density of 120 individuals per hectare in the right environment, and in some places this number skyrocketed to over 2,000 per hectare. Research is ongoing into the poisons produced by alpine salamanders. The toxins are not the result of their diet, which is mainly invertebrates, but is instead made within their body. The poison is neurotoxic, and while it is considered about twice as strong as cyanide, it is not produced in large enough quantities to be fatal to humans. The poison is believed to have a secondary effect, in addition to protecting against predators. It is believed to have antimicrobial properties to defend them against bacterial and fungal infections. The most closely related species to the alpine salamander is the Corsican fire salamander, Salamandra corsica. This is kind of interesting, as based on their coloration you would expect the black alpine salamander to be more closely related to Lanza's alpine salamander, which is similarly black. The Corsican fire salamander, on the other hand, is the first of several species we will be looking at with aposematic colours. Aposematic coloration are bright colours to warn predators that they are dangerous. There are some debates as to whether aposematism applies to the fire salamanders, since many of their species and subspecies are still poisonous without this coloration. As the name suggests, Corsican fire salamanders are only found on the island of Corsica, although they prefer the higher altitudes in the centre of the island. They have been found near sea level on the western side, but are much more common in the alpine regions. There is honestly not too much information known about the Corsican fire salamander. This next section comes with a massive disclaimer, as I only saw this information on Wikipedia. They had no sources for this information and I could not find any other research on it. However, it is still interesting enough to include, if it is accurate. Anyway, this information is about their reproduction. They can apparently give birth to larvae that live in water and then undergo metamorphosis to reach the adult stage, as well as young that are just small copies of the adults and therefore do not require metamorphosis. This strategy is known in some salamanders as a response to dry conditions where water is more scarce. A female Corsican fire salamander has been found with terrestrial young on her, but a nearby pond also held some aquatic young. The suggestion here is that the female gave birth to both types of young at the same time, although there are other explanations possible, such as a second female being nearby and giving birth to the aquatic young. Lanza's alpine salamander, Salamandra lanzai, is the other species that is typically completely black. It is sometimes known as the large alpine salamander, since it is bigger than the alpine salamander we looked at earlier. It can get up to 16 centimeters or 6 inches long. Its head is flat and its long tail is often rounded at the end. Like other salamanders, they eat mostly invertebrates, including insects, spiders, and slugs. They prefer subalpine prairies, but can also be found in montane forests, especially near streams. They are definitely an alpine species, however, being found between 1,200 to 2,800 meters above sea level, or 3,900 to 8,500 feet. Due to this rather specific terrain, their populations are very patchy, being isolated from each other by large distances. They are found in several valleys in northwestern Italy, especially in the area around the city of Turin and in the Cotentin Alps. They have also been found in southeastern France. Historical signs of them are known in the Maritime Alps on the French side of the France-Italy border, but it is unknown if they can still be found there today. As you might be able to tell from this rather detailed list of places, a few of them are found in the Alps in Italy and France, but the size of the current range is unknown. They give birth to 1 to 6 young at a time. These young do not have a larval stage, appearing as the same as the adults. This means that they do not require water to reproduce, unlike most amphibians, as their young do not have an aquatic stage. Lanza's alpine salamander is listed as critically endangered by the IUCN. This is not due to any population modelling done on this species, but instead, given its small patchy range and the known decline rates of related species, it is presumed to be severely endangered. It is found in several protected areas which may help to preserve this species, but it is still in a potentially precarious position. More cannot be known until comprehensive population studies are undertaken on it. The Near Eastern fire salamander, Salamandra infraimmaculata, live in quite a different environment to the previous species. They are found in dry shrublands and forests in Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. As amphibians, they do still require good sources of water, however, so will most commonly be found near rivers and freshwater springs in the area. During the day, they hide under leaves, roots, or rocks to retain their moisture. They will then come out at night to feed. They typically have 4 large yellow blotches on their head, and then various more blotches down their back and tail, although none on their belly. Many subspecies have been described based on the pattern of their blotches, but the validity of these subspecies is in serious doubt, as most of them are identical except for their patterning. There are a couple with other differences though, so there may still be valid subspecies, but more genetic testing is required in this species to know for certain. The largest of these subspecies can get up to 32 centimeters or 12 inches long. Near eastern fire salamanders mate during winter. A female may mate with several males. They are ovoviviparous, with the eggs incubating inside the female before she releases them as newly hatched young. The female is selective about the water where she births her young. This water often is temporary shallow pools that are formed after the rainy season. She will prefer pools without salamander larvae already in them, as they would prey on the newborns. Her entire litter is not birthed at the same time either, as she will release her young into several different pools. Given the dry areas in which these salamanders are found, this may be an adaptation to ensure that at least some of her litter survives if the water starts drying up. They actually have several adaptations that may be due to these drier conditions. For example, the larvae may be cannibalistic, although they are more likely to eat unrelated individuals instead of their litter mates. This could actually help at least some of the individuals survive if the pond they are in starts to dry up. In terms of the species as a whole, it is better for some to survive in this way than it is for all of the larvae to die due to starvation. Since the water pools the larvae live in are temporary, how long they take to metamorphose is important, and the quicker they do this the better. For this reason, the abundance of food is important, as more food will give them the energy they need to do this faster, especially while also achieving a good size as an adult. It is also thought that the larvae can detect the water levels dropping in their pool, and so perhaps trigger their metamorphosis as an emergency life-saving measure. The Near Eastern fire salamander is considered least concerned by the IUCN. This is actually a promising change, since the species was reassessed in 2022. Before this, it had been considered near threatened since 2006. The main change between these assessments is that the Near Eastern fire salamander is now known to have a much larger range. The original assessments assumed it was reliant on water in generally arid areas, so guessed its total range was quite restricted. While it certainly does require water, since it can make use of the temporary pools formed after the rainy season to reproduce, it can cover a much larger area than was previously thought. It can be threatened by some invasive species. In particular, mosquito fish in Israel have been proven to eat their larvae, so if predators like this spread further, then it could pose a problem for the species. Next is the North African fire salamander, Salamandra algira. It is found in Algeria, Morocco, and possibly Tunisia. It has 5 recognized subspecies, 4 of which are in Morocco, with the 5th being in Algeria. Its altitude ranges from near sea level up to 2,450 meters, or 8,040 feet. It is known mostly from damp forest, where it hides under roots and stones, but it can also be found in caves. It is completely absent from open and flat areas, so it does rely on the cover provided by forests and caves. Across most of their range, they are ovoviviparous, with the females having 8 to 50 eggs which are incubated internally in the female. In a small part of their range, those in part of northern Morocco are technically considered viviparous instead. This is because this population does not have traditional eggs. Instead, the young are directly nourished from the mother by certain fluids that she secretes. The North African fire salamander is listed as vulnerable by the IUCN. This is due to their patchy distribution, and while they can be locally common in certain areas, they are very rare in others. This patchiness is likely exacerbated by the strong loyalty to sites that is known in these salamanders. They rarely move more than a few hundred meters from their preferred resting place, and often much less. As well as this fragmentation, they are also under threat due to deforestation and increased agriculture destroying much of their preferred habitat. They are also sometimes collected for the pet trade, adding yet another pressure on their already vulnerable populations. Finally, we get to the fire salamander, Salamandra salamandra. This is the original fire salamander, and most of the others were originally considered part of this species. The Corsican, Near Eastern, and North African fire salamanders all used to be subspecies of the fire salamander, before being recognized as separate species. The fire salamander is now sometimes known as the common or European fire salamander to distinguish it from the other species. They are found throughout much of Europe, from Portugal to Greece and Bulgaria. While they tend to be found in altitudes from 250 to 1,000 meters or 820 to 3,300 feet, this is region specific, and in some areas they are quite common at much higher elevations than this range, while in others it can be near sea level. They live in forested hillsides mainly, but as amphibians do require small ponds or streams with good water quality. It has many subspecies, some of which have their own common names. While I don't usually focus on particular subspecies, several of the ones here are of particular interest. The pennabetic or long-snouted salamander, for example, has a particularly interesting phylogenetic history. It was originally named as a subspecies when first described in 1994, but in 2009 this was elevated to its own species. More research in 2021 proved that it was actually nested within the clade containing the other subspecies, so it was returned to being considered a subspecies. This uncertainty honestly just shows how arbitrary the distinctions between different species can be. Different subspecies can even have different types of reproduction. Most fire salamanders are ovoviviparous, but like that population of North African fire salamanders, several subspecies are truly viviparous. Despite this difference, they are still considered subspecies. Males and females look very similar, except during the breeding season. During the breeding season, the males have swollen glands around their vent. I realize I have not gone into details of courtship and mating for the other species in this genus, and this is because these behaviors are better studied in the fire salamanders. The other species likely do something similar, but for the fire salamander, the male will show his interest in mating by blocking the female's path and rubbing her with his chin. He then crawls beneath her and deposits a spermatophore on the ground. This is produced from the swollen glands I mentioned earlier and is a substance that includes a packet of sperm. The male will then try to lower the female's body to the spermatophore. If his courtship has been successful, the female will bring it inside her cloaca, fertilizing her eggs. In most subspecies, the eggs are then deposited into water just as they are about to hatch, but as I mentioned before, some subspecies do this differently. In captivity, females can retain some of the sperm to fertilize later clutches of eggs. This has not been seen in the wild, as it is likely an emergency mechanism that is only needed when she is unable to obtain fresh sperm. The poison of fire salamanders has also been better studied than in most other species. Their main toxin is known as samandarin, and it causes muscle convulsions, hypertension, and hyperventilation. This is often combined with other toxins. The larvae do not produce poison, but upon completing metamorphosis they will start to produce them from their liver and ovaries or testes. Their poison glands are concentrated around their head and back, and typically along the coloured sections of skin. The poisons are strong enough to be potentially dangerous to humans, but are also believed to help fight fungal and bacterial infections. Speaking of fungal infections, that is actually the largest threat to not only the fire salamander, but all of these species that we have been looking at today. I did not mention it earlier, as it was first discovered in fire salamanders, so it seemed appropriate to add it into their section. Chytrid fungi impacting amphibians was formally identified in 1998, although it existed at least a decade earlier. Frogs and toads were the main targets of this fungus, although some salamanders were also affected. This is believed to have caused the extinction of 90 species of amphibians and caused severe declines in a further 124 species. This is bad enough, but in 2013 a second species of this fungus was identified, and this specifically targets salamanders, although it does also affect a few species of frogs. Both species of the fungus cause a disease known as chytridiomycosis. The fungi are believed to be spread through the water and cause a variety of symptoms. These include skin sloughing off, bleeding, convulsions, rashes, and eventually resulting in death. It also causes some behavioural changes, including refusing to hide or flee from predators, being unable to turn themselves up the right way if flipped over, or sitting with an unusual posture. The salamander-specific fungus was first discovered in the fire salamander, in a population in the Netherlands in 2013. Since then, it has caused them to become extremely rare in parts of their range. They are listed as vulnerable by the IUCN, largely due to the impacts Chytrid fungus has had on them. This is not their only threat, however, as habitat loss is also a major problem in parts of their range. I hope you enjoyed this video. Fire salamanders are fascinating animals with their poisonous secretions and many ways of reproducing, even within the same species. Their historic associations with fire and alchemy also add to their mystique, making these brightly coloured amphibians highly memorable. Thank you for listening, and feel free to suggest another group of animals you want to see me cover in the comments below.